Good morning, everyone. We have another very interesting, but we have a very important show for you today. We have in studio Russ GUGINO, we have in studio Carol CALABRESE, and I am extremely grateful to have in studio Joseph Hernandez. You've heard me talk about Joe before, so let me just tell you a little bit again. Joseph Hernandez is an American entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, and visionary leader. He's a Cuban refugee and the son of a political prisoner. He fled the communist rule in Cuba at the age of 7, and his family arrived in this country. His family worked hard, taught him about education. His father washed dishes. His mother cleaned houses so they could have a living here. But they believe in the American dream. They taught him about education, the importance of education, the importance of this country, the love of this country. And he's a proud product of Florida public schools. He earned a Bachelor of Science degree. He went on to earn several degrees, a Master of Science, an MBA degree. He later completed a Master of Science in Chronic Disease at Yale University and a Master's in Global Healthcare Leadership at the University of Oxford. That's how qualified this individual is. And you've never met a person who more loves this country, who more understands the slippery slope of socialism to communism, because that's where they fled from. That's where his father was imprisoned. So he's just a great individual that I've gotten to know through this process. Joe, I'm proud to have you here today.
Such a great honor to be with you, sir. Thank you for having me. And it's always, we do this we do it on the phone, but it's so different to be here with you live. And yes, again, delighted to be here with you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
So tell our audience, I just gone quickly through it, but again, your family in Cuba, what was the situation? Your father was imprisoned. Tell us a little bit about that history.
Yeah, look, the communists came in on New Year's Eve in 1959. That's when Fidel came down from the Sierra Madres and effectively got rid of Batista. Batista got on an airplane, right, fled quickly. And the majority of my family left during the months preceding those days. My cousins were put on an airplane on a mission called Peter Pan. And for those of you that don't know the history of Peter Pan, in the Peter Pan story, the parents literally put their kids on an airplane not knowing whether they were going to see them again or not. And so all my cousins came on Peter Pan. And then soon after, my uncles left. My uncles and my grandfather left Cuba. My father was a little bit more optimistic that Fidel wouldn't last. And he felt that they would see right through him. They would see his Marxist ideology. And Cuba, while they didn't agree with Batista, because Batista was a corrupt individual, they didn't really want socialism. They didn't want Marxism in Cuba. So my father thought, he was kind of involved in the political circles, and he felt that it wasn't going to last. Unfortunately for him, Fidel lasted for 70 years.
Yeah, right.
And in 1978, my father ran afoul with the local Communist Party leader, and they brought up some trumped-up charges of crimes against the state, which there was no definition what that meant. And they gave him a 2-minute trial and then sentenced him to 7 years in hard labor prison.
Oh, my God.
In Cuba, which is the way, this is the way Fidel oppressed his enemies and the people that spoke against him. And so my father went to this prison in the northern part of the country, basically working the sugarcane fields, to cut down sugarcane, because that was still a product that Fidel was producing and selling to the world, especially to Russia at the time. And so, he had free labor. There were seven individuals in a cell with my father.
In one cell, seven
in one
individuals.
cell, yeah. And after about, I think my dad had served about 9, maybe 10 months of prison, he came back from the fields, and the following morning, 5 of the prisoners were dead, and 2 were incapacitated, and they were sent to a coma. They were in a coma. And it turned out, they later found out what had happened, and they had all gotten encephalitis. and they believe they had gotten meningitis encephalitis from eating horse meat. They were feeding the prisoners horse meat, decaying horse meat, and they think that was. My dad remember eating bad meat that night, the night before. Anyway, so my dad goes in a coma, and he's in a coma for a number of months. Starts to come out of it, and lo and behold, the Mariel boat lift is happening right around that time. My uncle, who had come in the early '60s. Had been successful in South Florida, and basically mortgaged his house, bought a shrimping boat called the Belkis Marie. I still remember the name of the boat, and then decided to cross the Florida Straits to go pick us up. And we were in Mariel Harbor, which is why it's called the Mariel Boat Lift, because we were in this harbor, which is, by the way, the same place Hemingway kept his fishing boat.
Oh wow,
the Pilar.
Yeah.
If you know history about Hemingway. So anyway, we were picked up on this boat, and another sort of part of that history is we crossed the Florida Straits in the middle of a storm. It was hurricane.
And you're 7 years old.
I was 7 years old. It's hurricane season. It was September 1980, and of course we hit a storm. And the captain was he felt so sad for us, I guess, because we were the only kids on this boat, that he let us go to the helm, and my mother and my two sisters and my brother, we were literally all hugging my mother as we crossed the storm. We were throwing up on her, and my mother didn't move. It's just I remember this vividly. So we crossed the storm. By the mercy of God, we survived that, and we landed in Key West Station, Naval Station, Key West.
Yeah,
and we disembarked this boat, and I remember seeing the first sight of an American. I never met an American.
Yeah, right.
And there was this American with the Red Cross bringing us blankets as we were getting off this boat. And again, these are memories that are sort of engraved in my mind. And we started from nothing. That's
it's an amazing story. It's an amazing story. I told you before, I have a friend who came from Cuba, same kind of situation. They sent the kids first. And so he ended up here. But it's incredible. I've heard the story from my friend Jose, and now your story rings so true to all of that and adds a lot of depth to it. So you're in America now. And what did your father do in Cuba, and what does he get to do here?
Yeah, well, my family in Cuba pre-revolution, they were entrepreneurs. We had a lot of businesses. He had, him and his brothers owned a number of different businesses. They were in the cattle business. They owned grocery stores. They owned distribution. So they were pretty involved in the business side in Cuba. And, of course, the communist government took all that over. And when we came here, our uncles were here. So we had some connections, of course.
That's good.
But we started from scratch. We moved to our own little apartment in North Miami Beach after spending some weeks with my grandparents, and my dad had to do whatever he could to put food on the table. So he went to the local restaurant and washed dishes there, and my mom cleaned houses, and my mom cleaned houses when we were in school. So she was always present when we were back from school. But we started our American life, which is, by the way, the story sounds novel, but it's not. I mean, this is what the Italians did and the Irish did, and all the Americans that came to this great country and built America. This is, we're a story of immigrants. This is a story that repeats over and over.
That is absolutely true. That a lot of people can relate to that. But you're first generation here, and I'm. Actually, my grandparents came, so my father was first generation. I'm actually just second generation here. So it's kind of amazing. A lot of people are in that situation, but to be the first generation to come, to have that courage, to cross the water, to have that courage and that, foresight to look for a better life for your family. That's what this was all about. And in your case, it was about getting away from socialism, communism. And so it gives you that appreciation of what this country can do.
There's no question. I mean, I always, I'm a preacher of how great this country is because I've seen the other side. I've lived it. Granted, I was young when I left. The reality is when you devoid humans of their identity, of their self-will, of their freedom, of their ability to do what they want when they want. We take that for granted every day in this country. And the reality is this doesn't happen in a lot of societies. And I just preach to everybody any moment I get, this is still the greatest country on the face of the earth. Our enemies want to tell us otherwise. And people in this country believe there's a better option, but there's not, guys. I mean, it's, you wouldn't, I mean, if you think about Cuba's one example, but, people get in rafts. They cross shark-infested waters to leave what the communists and socialists think that they can recreate here in America in a better way. I don't understand it. I am in love with America. There's nothing I wouldn't do for this country, and it's part of the reason I'm running.
Carl?
Joe, I couldn't help but think when you described the New Year's Eve of Castro coming down from the mountains and Batista fleeing. Yeah. That scene is depicted in the Godfather 2 movie.
That's right, yeah.
Very
actual story.
Right.
Yeah. The old saying that you can vote yourself into socialism, but you have to shoot yourself out.
Right.
And people don't understand just how dangerous this is. I also think back to a trip I took to Germany a few years ago. I was in Cologne. If you're in Cologne in the street, there are little gold plaques about 2 inches by 2 inches with people's names on them and where they died. And what these plaques all have in common is they're all Jewish, and they all died in concentration camps. And I remember one vividly of a family of 5, and all their names are there, and they all perished in different concentration camps. And the story that the guide told us was that the father of the family owned a shoe store. And his brother told him, let's get out of Germany, just as Hitler was coming to power. This guy is crazy. He is going to kill us all. And the father's reaction was, no, look, I'm a German. I fought for my country in World War I. Right. He's not going to hurt me or my family. He don't believe what he's saying. Well, you got to believe what these people are saying. And his whole family perished. But, it's just, unfortunately, now we're seeing this rise of socialism in the left in this country, and unless people like you and all of us here push back on the history of it, because the kids today have not learned about the dangers and abuses and abominations of communism and socialism. They've not learned that.
Yeah, Marxism is when you read it, it's a utopia. It's beautiful. Everybody's equal. Everybody gets equal share. Humans don't work like that. We are wired differently. And unfortunately, what ultimately happens is government fails because it. And by the way, if this was an N of 1, I'm a scientist, I look at statistics, right? If it was one singular event, you'd be like, you know what, maybe it's worth trying. But this has failed in every society we have attempted to replicate Marxism. It hasn't worked. It's killed 100 million people. I mean, we should learn from this. And our kids are not being taught this. Our societies are embracing these ideologies. Usually young individuals, highly educated young individuals. When in reality, if you really look at history, the thesis is quite convincing. It doesn't work.
But what's interesting is that wherever it's been tried, it's failed. And of course, the left always says, "Well, that's because it has been implemented the way it was supposed to be." And I say, it's got to be the most unlucky philosophy and economic system in the world, because no matter where you put it, Africa, Asia, Middle East, no matter where you put it, South America, it fails.
It fails. All right, we're going to take a break now, but then. Oh, we got a little bit of time. Okay. So I want to go through your education, because that, to me, a 7-year-old coming from Cuba, you must have been a bright guy.
Well, I mean, I don't know if I was bright or I was just beat up and told that I had to go to school all the time. But no, look, in our household, and I think it was indicative of every Cuban household. I mean, we were raised this way, and our cousins. I mean, all my cousins are doctors. They're highly educated as well. We were taught that life had dealt us a really crappy card. We were in this society. We didn't speak the language. We were foreigners, and we had to assimilate quickly, and we had to stand on our 2 feet. And the only way to really achieve that was education. And that was really highly
hard work in education.
Yeah, I mean, there's no short path.
That's right.
We were taught that. So we had to get educated, and that was very centered to our upbringing. And so I went to school. I trained as a scientist, as my original training.
All right, we're going to talk about your education. My father always told me when I was going to college, you either work or you go to school. It's one of those two things. You can't, there is no summer off. Welcome back, everyone. Again, we're here in studio with Russ Gugino, with Carl CALABRESE, and my very important guest, Joseph Hernandez. So we were talking about Joe coming to this country from Cuba, what that was all about, his love for this country. So I want to give people an understanding of education. So again, as an Italian, we were taught you had to work or go to school.
Right.
You obviously went to school quite a bit and got a lot of education. Tell me about your trip through that.
Yeah, I went to school because my dad made me work, and I was like, I don't know if I'm cut out to this. But
work or go to school.
I got to tell you a story because my father, when I was 14, now it's child labor law violations, of course, but when I was 14, my dad said, you got to get a job. And of course, I'm like trying to avoid getting a real job. And he goes, it's okay. I'm going to have my friend come pick you up tomorrow morning at 5:30. You better show up. Your mom's going to make you lunch, and the truck's going to pick you up tomorrow at 5:30 in the morning. I'm like, what? So I show up with my Hulk Hogan, lunchbox, and it up pulls up this big truck with a trailer, and probably 14 Hispanic guys on the back of this truck. And I try to get on the front seat of this truck, and they're like, no, you got to go in the back. So I'm hanging out for my dear life on this truck, working with these guys, doing tree service.
Yeah.
And that was my first job. And I'm like, I'm not sure I'm cut up for this. I got to go to school. So that's the motivating factor.
Right.
But, it's hard work or education, as you said.
So tell us about your education now. You first got a degree from the University of Florida. Tell us what that degree was and where you went from there.
Well, I wanted to be, I come from a long line of physicians in my family.
Right.
Most of my cousins and uncles are in the medical arena. And I wanted to be a scientist. That was kind of my first passion in life. So I started off as a scientist. I trained my undergraduates in neuroscience, which is the study of the brain. And then from there, I went on to graduate degree, and I got a degree in molecular genetics, focusing on this new technology called gene therapy, which is where you manipulate viruses to express certain proteins or genes that you want.
An extremely interesting area.
Yeah, it was cutting edge stuff. And but what was interesting is during my scientific training, I kept picking up the Wall Street Journal and reading about all this business, and I was just intrigued by business in general. And I convinced my committee to let me go to business school. So I ended up going to business school and getting a degree in finance and entrepreneurship as I was finishing up my graduate work in science. And then I decided to go into the pharmaceutical world, and thereafter is when I went to Yale and Oxford.
So you worked first at Merck.
I did, yeah. I went to Merck.
So did you get the other degrees from Yale and Oxford before?
I got those later in life. Yeah,
later in life, okay.
Yeah. So I ended up working in the pharmaceutical world. I was involved. I worked for one of the greatest American companies. Merck is one of the most storied companies, highly ethical. Just a great company. And I learned my business. I got my business grounding there. Went to Silicon Valley, and then thereafter is when I went to Yale and Oxford. But I felt.
So what intrigues me about you is the entrepreneurship. So you started multiple amount of companies, and so tell us how you got into the entrepreneurship. Did you leave Merck?
Yeah. The way it happened was just serendipity, like a lot of things in life. I had a great job at Merck. I had launched 3 pharmaceutical products. I had a trajectory for management at Merck, which would have been a great career as well.
Sure.
But lo and behold, I'm sitting down at dinner one night, and I get this phone call from the recruiter in Silicon Valley. And they were intrigued by my background because I had a molecular genetics background, and they had just started this company called Affymetrix, and Affymetrix was doing something really interesting. They were putting the whole human genome on a computer chip. Yeah. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So lo and behold, I show up to Silicon Valley, get the job basically there. And a week later, I moved across the country in Silicon Valley, and there is where back then it's not the case now, but back then that was the center of entrepreneurship in the nation. Yes. That's where all these great companies that emerged in the .com and in biotech and whatever not emerged from there. So I got the entrepreneurial bug, and that's why I learned that you can really just push the envelope. Yeah. And only in America, can you do stuff and fail and still be proud. In Japan, you have to go hide in a corner for 20 years of your life. In America, failure is okay as long as you're learning.
As long as you keep on going.
Pushing. Yeah. So I love that spirit. I just became drunken by the spirit of entrepreneurship, and that's why I started building my companies. And we built 12 of them. Not all were successful. We forget about the bad ones really quickly. But the ones that were good, we were proud of them. I was involved with a company that developed a test for HPV, which now in every gynecological office, a woman gets an HPV test. That's a routine technology. We developed a test for thyroid cancer. This test called Thymira, which is now used predominantly in all. If you have thyroid, if your doctor thinks you have thyroid cancer, this is a test that's used. They call it microRNA panel test. We developed the multiple myeloma test, a test that if you think you have myeloma, we can tell you with this test what drugs you should be using, what drugs you shouldn't. Is it high risk? Is it low risk? Do you need to be really worried? Do you need to start planning your future, or do you have more time on this earth? So these are things that were transformative in medicine, and I'm really proud of those achievements. They weren't easy. There were a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of long paths or long months without salary because we had to pay our way. And it's entrepreneurship is not as glamorous as people think, but in the end, you own your own destiny. You're free, which is what happens in America. It's the American way.
Entrepreneurship to me is what America is about. It's you doing it yourself.
Yep.
Not my history. So I'm an attorney, but I built and sold 72 townhouses through 88 through 91. I had a company called Tri-State Video Leasing. I got in terms of video leasing through the years that they had it.
You're
an
entrepreneur.
Video stores. I'm a Ben & Jerry's. I was a Ben & Jerry's franchisee. I had a Ben & Jerry's in Las Vegas for a number of years, 12 years actually. I owned a gym called Fitness Factory for a number of years. And all that time practiced law. So, I'm intrigued by that because it's the drive inside of you to make things better, to accomplish things.
Yeah.
To me, that's what's important, and that's what I see in you.
Yeah, it's entrepreneurship is an American. It's really American if you really think about it. And I go, by the way, when I travel, when I studied in England, as I told you, when I went to Oxford, the English were so intrigued by how Americans just took risks. They couldn't understand it. They're like, wait a second, you do this, and then people give you money to do that, and if you succeed, great. But if you lose money, it's okay. I mean, and I said, well, if you do, of course, if you do a good job and it fails, that's just life. And they couldn't understand how America embraced this ideology, which is very truly American. And it's the reason, if you look at the American history, 250 years, America has achieved more than any organized government in the history of humanity. I mean, we put a man on the moon with sequence of human genome.
Right.
We have led in the artificial intelligence revolution. We have created medicines that have extended our lives. This is all American. And I don't know, if you're an American and you don't feel proud about our achievements, there's something wrong with you because America has transformed the world.
And Joe, it's interesting because in the last few months with the World Cup being in America and all these Europeans coming to America,
here, right?
And when you
realizing
listen to them, they were just overwhelmed by the entrepreneurship, the
What's
choices
here?
in products,
Right.
how welcoming Americans are. I mean, they did nothing but heap praise on us. And here in America, everybody's kind of in the doldrums now, and just negative and pessimistic. And the Europeans saw it and said, "Boy, you people, this is an incredible country."
So, Joe, all those accomplishments, you could have just laid back and taken the fruit of your accomplishments, but you are a philanthropist, and now you are there to help us all. You want to get into government, which certainly is a blood sport, as I describe it. But you want to get in there. Yeah. It's not that you need the money that they make over there. You're going to take a pay cut, but you're going to accomplish something for New York State.
Yeah. Well, listen, I one of the other things my parents taught us was you have to give back.
Public service.
There was always you work hard, you achieve. You love this country, but you give back. And we were big fans of Ronald Reagan as a kid.
Oh my God, yes.
I remember watching the TV, in the 80s when we came here to America, and Ronald Reagan was pretty prominent then. And of course, he was so optimistic about America. That shining city on the hill, and all these great. He had these great stories of how to tell political ideology. But one of the things he would say is. And I always reference this, even with my kids. I say, Ronald Reagan would say, freedom is but one generation from being lost.
Yes, it is.
And this society does not exist in perpetuity. I mean, we have enemies, foreign and domestic, that want to change the way of life in America because we lead the world. I mean, there's a lot of elements, a lot of reasons why people in other societies want to change the trajectory of America. But to make sure that America continues to lead, to make sure that America continues to be the bastion of freedom and entrepreneurship and goodness in the world. I mean, we do good things. Americans do good things. We have been by the media, we've been told that we're bad people. We're not. We are the good guys in the scene, okay? And I think that requires a level of involvement and a level of engagement. And I believe in the citizen politician. This is the concept that our founding fathers talked about a lot about. These were people that, you worked, you created your life, you gave service to your people, and then you went back to society, right? It is like military service. Today, unfortunately, we view political service as a career and as a, when people talk about being career politicians, I always cringe. But the reality is you have to give back. The only way to maintain the society is to give back. And this is my small way of, I can't serve in the military. I'm too old. So this is my way of giving back to this great society that gave me so much and gave my family so much.
Joe, let me ask you this. You have a unique perspective on how the economy works and the skills you've developed. And you can bring a lot of that. In fact, you propose to bring a lot of that to the Comptroller's office. In fact, if I remember correctly, you talked about looking at every single expenditure, every dollar.
Yeah.
At the state of $230 billion and be able to track it, every single penny. Give us an idea of how that would work.
Well, look, I think our state, I would say I think most states could really would be better served if we had people that had business acumen. I mean, at the end of the day, government is a business. We have to run it like a business because, you collect revenues, you provide a service, whether we like it or not. What we're doing for our citizens is providing a service, and it's either a good one or a bad one, and it's got a price. This is business. We should have business people more engaged in government, and I encourage my business friends to get involved. Of course, they're all scared, but I think we have to view this role, and I would argue every political role, with a mindset of, are we providing good services? Are we paying the right amount? Are we being honest about how we spend our money? Are we abusing our power? These are things that are important to ask in any leadership role, but more importantly in government, because the power that these elected politicians have are pretty significant, and it's easy to get corrupt. It is easy to fall down the wrong hole.
I say that what's happening here in New York, because we're so controlled by Democrats and we're so controlled by downstate Democrats, and now we're so controlled by DSA Democrats, they do because they can. That's what I say. They do because they can. It's not because it's what the constituents want. It's not because it's what the constituents need. It's not because it's what will keep us going. So the fact in New York that we're last or near last in all of the important criteria, something that I've heard you say before, I think deserves repeating, about who pays the bills in New York. Tell my audience how many corporations and how many individuals actually support the tax base.
Well, New York. Obviously, we have a crazy budget. This year's $277 billion.
$277 billion.
Yeah, billion with a B. By the way, and I did this exercise, if you rank all the countries in the world, their budgets, and if New York was a country, we would be number 13. We spend more than Sweden. We spend more than Israel.
Crazy.
I mean, think about this. And we don't even have an army. We don't have a navy.
Right.
We don't have embassies around the world.
Crazy.
We're just a state. So it's a little insane, the amount of money that we spend. But the other thing that's really interesting, and you're referring to our tax base, in New York, we only have we have thousands and thousands of corporations. Only 799 corporations pay. They pay 75% of the corporate taxes.
Let's do that again.
Yeah.
So we have thousands of corporations, and how many pay?
799 pay 75% of the taxes.
Again, we're here with Russ Gugino, Carl CALABRESE, and our guest, Joseph Hernandez, running for New York State Comptroller. So, Joe, we were talking about 791 corporations.
99.
Pardon me?
799.
799
Sorry, I have to correct you. I'm a scientist.
Corporations, yeah, I get it, pay 75% of the corporate tax.
Yeah, it's kind of insane.
And there are tens of thousands of corporations
I think
in New York State.
I forget the number of total corporations, but it's about 20,000, 30,000, I think it is. Yeah, I mean, it's a concentrated tax base. Our tax base also at the state level is mostly Wall Street. I mean, the majority of our taxes are these 799 corporations that I'm referring to are mostly in the financial services sector. They're mostly banks. They're mostly funds, hedge funds.
And these are people that Kathy's driving away from New York. We're not going to be the financial capital.
These are the ones she said they should move to Florida, which a lot of them have, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that, the individuals, right? The individuals that create these corporations, there's only about 100,000 people, about 984, I think is the number of individuals that pay the majority of the personal taxes.
The personal tax.
They pay about 40% of total taxes. And then when you look at the top 200 people, those people pay on aggregate about $5 billion of our tax base. So those 200 people have houses elsewhere. They have opportunities elsewhere. If you tell them to go away, if you make their life so miserable, if you make videos in front of their houses where you threaten their safety, those people are going to leave, and that's what's happening. Unfortunately, we've lost so much revenue in taxes because our idiotic policy of vilifying people who are successful, who work hard. By the way, if you talk to all these individuals, and everybody harps on Ken Griffith. Ken Griffith, built a company out of a dorm where he would skip his lunches to be able to have enough money to invest. I mean, these are not people that that inherited this wealth.
That's right.
These are people that took risks, that put their livelihood on the line and didn't sleep for long hours and skipped holidays to be able to work and change an industry. And for that reason, they made money and they create jobs and they pay into the tax system. And now we're vilifying them. And that is so anti-American.
So tell me, so a person with your history that we've gone through, what do you think of Mondami? What is, how first of all, how the hell did we ever get there? And what do you think of him over there?
Well, I'm sure Mondami has heard about me because I talk a lot about Mondami. I think Mondami is unfortunately someone who is gotten traction because he's charming. Has a pretty smile. He speaks eloquently, but when you really dive into his policies, they're dangerous. They're probably the most dangerous things I have heard in America since I've been living in America. I think, and I don't want to personalize this in any particular way. I want to talk about sort of the ideology. I think the ideology and the ideology the DSA is spewing is anti-American. It is the enemy within, and we have to stop it. It is every American's requirement to stop this trajectory of this ideology grabbing a hold in America because it is destructive, it's dangerous, it is the antithesis of how America was built, and it does not belong here.
So for someone whose family came from Cuba, who've seen the transition occur in a country, that is what I see happening with people like Mondami. Unfortunately, I see it with Sean Ryan here in our city of Buffalo that he got elected. Yeah. I see how Mondami and Bernie Sanders is, they're taking over the Democratic Party. So it's not, I certainly don't see that Democrats are bad. Yeah. But the elected Democrats that we have today are very bad. A lot of them are very bad.
And look, we have to pay attention to what is resonating with what they're saying.
Yes.
And look, the reality is the economy is the cost of living, and we can talk about all those factors that have contributed to the cost of living. But the cost of living in America has gone up significantly. I would argue it's because we overprinted dollars, and there's another sort of economic argument as to what needs to be done for that. But as a kid today, you graduate, and it's very difficult to get a job. And then the likelihood of you owning a home is these are things that we as a society need to deal with. We have lost the middle class. We lost manufacturing. And again, we can point to NAFTA. We can point to a bunch of different things that happen in our government's decision-making that have driven the middle class out of obtaining the middle class. And so we need to pay attention to the things that are brewing that are allowing for this ideology to grab traction, because once it gets traction, it is very difficult to shake off. And if you look at history, it starts like this. It starts vilifying people who create wealth. It starts by removing private ownership, by touting that government can do better when in the history of humanity, government, even the Romans, couldn't even deliver good service. So they're not going to recreate it today. It's not going to happen. But we need to stop this ideology, and we got to pay attention to the cost of living. I mean, I think that's a real issue.
Joe, what's interesting is how blatant and open the Democratic Socialists of America are now about their agenda. They never were. They always kind of kept it under the bushel. But in the last month or so, they published their agenda. It's called "Workers Deserve More."
That's right.
And it, no borders, no police, no prisons,
no Senate, no
public ownership of corporations, radical restructuring of American government. Abolish the Senate and the Supreme Court and the president. I mean, it's bizarre, and they're not making any bones about it. A few nights ago, one of the co-chairs of the DSA lives in New York. I believe her last name is Romer. Was on one of the shows, and they asked her. They went through point by point. Do you support no prisons? Oh, absolutely. Do you support doing it with the Pentagon? Absolutely. They're making no bones about this agenda
because they're winning.
They're winning, and that's right.
No, they are emboldened. There's no question about it. I always like to when people come and they sort of make an argument that we should accept this ideology or at least welcome it. I said, you know what? 100,000 Americans gave their life.
That's right.
Fighting communism and socialism in Vietnam and Korea, and 4 in the Bay of Pigs. By the way, everybody forgets 4 Americans died servicing the Bay of Pigs invasion, and in Grenada we lost 14 Americans fighting against the communists there. We have lost 100,000 Americans, and I take that very personal when somebody says that and says, we should consider this ideology. We should not consider it. This is anti-American. This does not belong in our borders. This is not something that we should be experimenting with, and this is why I wake up every morning and I try to fight this ideology as much as I can, however I can. And, if God gives me the opportunity to be the comptroller, golly gee willikers, I'm going to fight every day against this ideology.
My father got a Purple Heart in Normandy in World War II. I mean, these are the people who dedicated their lives, were willing to risk their lives, were willing to give their lives for a country that we have talked about, an entrepreneurship country, a country where you can come from nothing, and hard work and education could take you anywhere. And now that's all changing. So, look, if you're elected, and there is no if in my mind, when you're elected comptroller of the state of New York, tell us what you want to accomplish.
Well, look, I think there are a couple of things that I want to focus on, and the issue of cost of living is an important piece of that. And the comptroller has some things they can do. I mean, it has a lot of power. It's a very powerful office. It's one that doesn't get talked about because it's not really super sexy, to use a lack of a better term, but the reality is a very powerful role.
It is
in the sense that it does 2 things, which are very critical to the honesty of government. One is it audits. It has the power of the audit, and it was carved out in Article 5, Section 1 of the Constitution of New York, which basically defined the role. And by the way, this happened in 1847 when we were seeing corruption in government and the legislative were stealing, the executive branch was stealing, and lo and behold, we said we need to put somebody in there that's going to bring some honesty to the process. So this role is supposed to be an honest role.
It's really not a political role.
It's not supposed to be a political role. It's supposed to be the adjudicator of where our dollars go.
Right.
The last gate.
It's the watchdog for us.
The watchdog, exactly. So it has 2 roles. One is, the audit role, and the other one is managing one of the largest pools of capital in America, which is the pension fund. It's about $300 billion of cash, which the comptroller is the sole trustee, the one person that gets to direct that capital in any direction he or she chooses. Very, very powerful. So as it relates to what I want to do, one is we want to make sure that we have good returns on the pension for our pensioners. And this money belongs to the people that work to the state. This is not the government's money. This is pensioners' money.
Right.
So we need to manage that effectively. The problem is that it's linked to cost of living, because what happens is if the pension fund doesn't return enough money to pay the pensioners out, you and I have to pay the difference. And that's what's been happening. So for every dollar we pay out today, and last year we paid $16.9 billion in pension benefits, every dollar that gets paid out, 75 cents are made on returns. The difference you and I pay, the 25 cents, you and I have to pass the hat and collect. And of course, if the performance is less, we pay more. Performance is better, we pay less. So it behooves us to have good returns on the fund. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build out an in-house investment team to make sure that we get good returns, so that the tax pressure that we have is less, and that our pensioners get what they need. and that we deliver on the commitment we made to these people, because we made a commitment that they're going to have a sound retirement, that they're going to be able to live the last years of their life with the security that we promised them. And that's an obligation that we need to keep. So that's one thing we're going to do. The other thing is we have pervasive fraud and abuse in the system. And I'm going to put together day one, and I'm working on this right now. We're going to put together a fraud strike team. And this is going to be the smartest freaking people I can find that know forensic accounting, that know how to build criminal prosecution crimes that are financial in nature, that because we have to put these people away. The people that are stealing from us, the only way you deter abuse is to put people in prison. It doesn't sound pretty. The DSA doesn't like it, I'm sure. But we're going to put people in prison because people who steal from us should go to prison. And we're going to do that. And we're going to use big data, we're going to use artificial intelligence technologies to make sure that we trace every dollar from the minute it leaves your pocket to the minute it gets used to pay a pothole, to fix a pothole, or the minute it gets stolen. We're going to figure out where all those dollars go. And again, if you steal from our state, you better run, because we're coming after you. There's no question about that. And that's going to be real, because we haven't done that. We have not been, the current comptroller has not used the power of the office to make sure that theft doesn't happen, to make sure that abuse doesn't happen. Our elected officials are also abusing the system. We're going to hold them accountable, and we're going to shine light on this abuse. And then the third thing we're going to do is we're going to invest in New York. Look, New York has built the Industrial Revolution. If you think about the history of New York, IBM, Corning, General Electric, Kodak, the list goes on and on. These are the companies that transform. The reason we have this light bulb shining on us today is because of a company that was based here in New York.
Here in New York.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so we have New York, the Empire State, the Erie Canal, changed the world in such an imperative way. And so New York is the Empire State, has been the Empire State. But we have, for whatever reason, the politicians in Albany have ignored the importance that New York has played in that role.